And without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce to you our first speaker of the day. Chris Rogers is a graduate student in the Department of Health Sciences, and his talk today is about the discrepancy between perception and reality when trying to assess student health outcomes.
Perception is a funny thing. Since elementary school, I always thought there were two kinds of people in the world. There were math people, and then there were non-math people. And yes, that is a picture of me. I never understood how there were people in the world that actually could go to math classes and understand what was being taught. It didn't make sense that people enjoyed going to these classes. It wasn't until 10 years after high school that I was so afraid to sign up for a college-level math class that my wife had to do it for me. But it was in that first statistics class that I realized something. I met one of the most amazing statistics teachers who linked the perceptions that I have about math with the reality about math. And I realized I liked math. You see, perceptions have a basis in reality, but they're not always completely accurate. They're usually clouded with people's thoughts, their emotions, their feelings, their worldview. However, in research and policymaking, we use perceptions all the time. In fact, perceived health, so how people feel about their own health, is often used as a proxy measure to estimate actual health. And within adult populations, it tends to be relatively accurate. Now, this is used to help build, change, guide interventions, even develop population-level health metrics. My thesis talk today is dealing specifically with understanding health perceptions. And the way I was able to do this was to take a look at the National College Health Assessment. The National College Health Assessment is a survey that's done every year here at California State University, Northridge. So the way the survey works is they have the first question. And the first question says this: how do you describe your health? And students are given responses from excellent being the best health ever and poor being the worst health. Now, if we think about California State University, Northridge, we'd imagine that college students, being healthy and young, would probably have a very strong sense of self-health. And additionally, we have a wealth of different programs here on campus to help people stay healthy. We have the SRC, the Klotz Student Health Center. We have counseling centers. We even have farmers market here. With all these different resources, I wanted to find out, are students' health perceptions actually changing? And so what I did was I ended up looking at 13,000 student responses. These student responses ranged from surveys that were administered in 2006 all the way to 2016. Now, this isn't actual true time trend analysis. The problem here is every single year is technically a different population. So what I did to kind of understand this a little bit better is I looked at each year and I took the demographic characteristics of those years. I looked at the age, looked at the gender, race of all these different years, and what I found is every single year, those demographic characteristics were very similar. And then finally after that, I looked at all my different questions I'm trying to consider, and I saw that the variability or the responses in those questions, they were also very similar. So one of the things that we as researchers can kind of make a guess at is because they are all similar, we're going to assume that they will all act similarly. So additionally, I need to pick a statistical test that would also match the data necessary. I ended up choosing the Mantel-Hansel test. This is a test that corrects for any potential linear trend within the data. The reality is, when we're looking at efficacy of interventions, changes that we want to make on campus, we don't want those changes to be based on natural courses or changes that would happen over time. Instead, we want those changes to be based on actual significance. So the Mantel-Hansel test raises the bar for significance by correcting for any potential natural change that might already happen. And what I found amazed me. So let's get to the actual data. So thinking back about that question of excellent and poor, the proportion of students reporting fair poor, this is the bottom of the barrel, the people that assume they are the most unhealthy. they statistically significantly increased here on campus. We saw an increase from 12% all the way to 20%. This is a 61.2% increase in the people who feel they are extraordinarily unhealthy. It's a pretty interesting finding. What made it more interesting is when I looked at the actual health indicators of this population. Because again, this is how you perceive your health. So one would assume that if you are perceiving your health as extremely unhealthy, that maybe you are actually being unhealthy. So let's look at some of the indicators here on campus. Let's think about smoking. Now, if you're thinking you're very unhealthy, or much of our students are thinking they're very unhealthy, we would assume that cigarette use would probably go up. But instead, found a statistically significant decrease in cigarette use from 17% to 7%. Well, maybe it's just isolated cigarettes. But no. What about sexually transmitted infections? Again, we saw a statistically significant decrease in sexually transmitted infections from 6% to 3%. This is all over an entire 10-year span, a natural gradual trend of students changing their behaviors. So now maybe it's academics that's driving this, because this is an academic institution. So I decided to look at grades as well. And what I found was this. We assumed that maybe grades would fall off because you're feeling very poor health. But instead, what I found was that grades actually increased. The proportion of people reporting getting A's and B's, the top tier, increased from 77% to 86%. So we have students who are getting healthier and getting better grades. Maybe it's a mental health issue. Well, when I looked on campus, I also looked at the indicators such as suicidal ideation and stress. They also decreased. Maybe it's alcohol. So I looked at binge drinking. Binge drinking on campus over the 10-year span also decreased. Now, both of these didn't meet the statistical significant test, but they all provided meaningful decrease. I also looked at body mass index, just to check. And what I found is body mass index didn't actually completely decrease. However, it maintained relatively consistent. So what in the world does all this mean, right? Because it's a bunch of numbers, and again, right, I'm a non-math person. What this means today is there is a stark discordant trend, a big difference, a misalignment between actual health perception and real health reality. Students are feeling they're further and further more unhealthy. However, the campus on average is becoming healthier and healthier. Well, initial regression that I looked at ended up suggesting that maybe this is due in slight part to other misperceptions on campus. Maybe it also has something to do with other mental health issues, and maybe it also has to do something with potential social concerns. However, we're going to take all those items that kind of drive perception of health, we're going to lead us to the psychology department. For us future health practitioners, we have two questions. First of all, this indicator of perceived health, is it still accurate for our college campus? And the second, if it's not accurate, what are the potential consequences for a misalignment between health and reality? However, today with the data available, I'm not able to give you a conclusive answer. But I can leave you with this. All of our interventions here we have on campus base their standards, how effective they are, the measures that they use are perceived health. Different kinds of health perception measures. Now, if this is an inaccurate measure, how are we actually determining they're effective? Additionally, like I said, students on campus are relatively healthy. And not only that, we have this wealth of health resources. If you would, we have a safety net of different health promotion activities here on campus to help keep students safe. Now, what happens when these students, us, we graduate out of this program and we still feel we have poor health? And then once we still feel we have poor health, we find out that we actually start experiencing true diminished health. Well, what ends up happening is we fall into this shame cycle. Students who felt they were unhealthy now actually are unhealthy, and now feel they're more unhealthy, and they become further unhealthy all the way down until they end up giving up on health altogether. So maybe here on our campus, we should start considering letting go of the health terror tactics. We need to stop focusing on risk and instead maybe consider health promotion to highlight the resiliency, the beneficial choices, the actual health that we are seeing here on campus day in and day out. We don't want students to end up falling once they leave our institution. So, when my perceptions changed about mathematics, something happened. I realized I actually enjoyed math. So within 1 year, I was able to become a statistics tutor. I also got a job in the Los Angeles County Department of Public Health doing epidemiological and statistical research. This is 1 year after saying, I am absolutely not a math person, I will never do math. 2 years after that, I came to Cal State Northridge and began teaching biostatistics labs classes here. The non-math person teaching math classes. 3 years, I find myself the data manager on multiple research projects. I find myself a graduate level statistics tutor. And finally, I'm also applying to PhD programs in epidemiology and biostatistics. This non-math person changed to become a completely math-focused person. What changed? Not reality. The truth did not change, only my perception. The lesson that we can learn here at Cal State Northridge is this. If we can invest into changing student perceptions, there's a possibility that not only will we build a better indicator for our interventions here, we also may unlock students' potential health and future health outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. As someone who still considers himself not a math person, not only did I really like all of the ways you made that data meaningful, but also the really specific and concrete ways that we can use that data to change outcomes. Our judges will now have a couple of questions for Chris.
Thank you for a very engaging presentation. My question is, of course, after that, so how do we change students' perceptions of their own health?
Sure. So changing student perceptions and investing into changing student perceptions is a really complex question. And I appreciate you for asking that. However, the way we're going to start to change student perceptions is literally to mirror how healthy they actually are. If we're able to show students how healthy they are, the potential resiliency that they have innately inside them, and maybe show them that some of their perceptions are inaccurate, we can start revealing these inaccuracies and maybe bring back into alignment health perception and health reality. So on campus, we need interventions that focus on showing students pictures of themselves, saying, this is you, this is who you are. And maybe we can once again see that perception link up with reality.
Thank you for the presentation. This reminds me of a study that I see like about a year ago about the misperception of the weights. So a lot of people actually, they feel that they were not overweight, but actually by the standard BMI they were. So I really appreciate your study, which actually indicate that in our campus, actually a large percent of people might have misperceived their health quality. And so in the next step, how would you plan to find out why they have this misperception, on what basis they form their perception of their health?
Sure thing. So again, this research, I'm extending it out to start looking at some sort of, to start building a logistic regression model to identify predictors of these changes in health perceptions. The way I'm doing that is I'm going to take that model and repeat that model over each time sequence and finding whether or not the odds of these different indicators start changing over time. And so my goal is to identify, with these changing odds over time, which indicators or which issues students may be having the greatest trouble with. And then building interventions based on these specific indicators we deem as predictors, based on statistical analysis, and highlight those on our campus. So my goal is to extend this and actually, like you're saying, begin to tease out or pull out what is actually driving this change. I did cop out and say it's for the psychology department, but in public health, we are also interested in that. But it is a very complex question. And like I said, initial regression is very convoluted. There's many different factors that are building into here. And because we have data sets spanning over 10 years, when I linked all those data sets, not all the questions matched up. So the goal would be to try to identify the questions that we're able to use as predictors and use them and keep building from them.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.